Okay, today we're going to learn Masechet Pesachim, Daf Yud. Masechet Pesachim in its entirety is dedicated by Sivya Tversky in honor of her daughter Shoshana Baker. She astounds me by her love of learning, the depth of her knowledge, and her dedication to Hadran, and also in honor of the forthcoming bar mitzvah of our grandson, Ethan Lurie, on Shabbat Parshat Tetzaveh. Lastly, the Masechet is dedicated in memory of Sivya's father, Harav Pesach Zechariah Halevi ben Reuven Vilea Zlatis, Zichrono Lebracha. He was my inspiration for starting my first cycle of Daf Yomi 8 years ago as the new cycle started when I was saying Kaddish for him. I have no idea how many cycles he learned. I dove into uncharted waters and the learning brought me comfort in a year that I could not have predicted would be as difficult as it was. His Yurtzeit occurs while we learn this Masechet. Okay, with that, we're going to get started with our amazing Daf, all about, I say that these dapim are great and remember them because in a few days, we're going to get to really complicated ones about going to enter the realm of Tuma and Tahara. Okay, maybe we have some references to it in these sugyot, where a lot of these sugyot are comparable to Tuma and Tahara, but remember these dapim when we get there in a few days. And as always, we might get to some complicated dapim, but they will pass. Okay, so we're dealing all day, except for the very end, is going to be issues of sfikot, okay, which are doubt situations. We started them yesterday. We talked about the famous Tesha Chanuyot case, which is the 9 stores. We talked about the Shtei Kupot, one of Chulin, one of Truma, right? And we had these 2 situations. The first was we had 2 piles. We had 9 piles of matzah, one of chametz, and we're not sure where this pile came from, depending on the scenario, different halacha. And then we ended with this case of 2 piles, one chametz, one matzah. We had 2 houses, one was checked, one wasn't checked. We have 2 mice, each one brought into a different house, and we can go on the working assumption that this one, right, the one that was chametz took it into the house that was not checked, and the one that was matzah took it into the house that was checked. Okay, and in the end we basically said because bedika chametz is only d'Rabbanan, we can be lenient. Now what's interesting here is that we're going to have some sugyot are more lenient. Some seem to be more stringent. And there's always this issue back and forth between, on the one hand, bedika chametz is only midirabanan and bebito ba'al masage. On the other hand, this is chametz b'Pesach. And we all know how stringent we are about chametz b'Pesach, and there's various reasons. First of all, chametz is asur b'mashu, even any amount. It's not batel. Regular laws of nullification don't apply. Also, it's isur karet. If you eat chametz, it's isur karet. There's all sorts of reasons to be particularly stringent when it comes to chametz on Pesach. So on the one hand, it's bedika, which is Rabbanan. On the other hand, it's chametz, right? It means having chametz around, which we don't really want around. So now we're going to have a slew of cases. And if you see from the sheet that I put out, that basically we're going to have a number of cases. And each case, we're going to say it's like the following case, where there's a machloket about that case. So depending on where you side there will affect how you side here. So starting on line 3, and there's actually an article in Hebrew by Tanya Regev about this whole idea that went up on our site today about what's, first of all, she points out that, these are questions that in a postmodern world, we also, we're all living in this world of doubt. And the rabbis also view themselves as, there's situations where we don't have a clear-cut answer. And what's going on here is, how do we deal with a situation when we don't have a clear-cut answer? We don't have a path to follow. So what do we go by? And that's why they try to fit it into other cases of sfekot that we have in other situations. It's a kind of case like we discussed yesterday. There is a truth. We just don't know the truth. And then the question is, how do we go about dealing with that? When we don't know the truth, how do we resolve that? So you'll see that today, some issues get resolved and some don't. The problem is when they don't get resolved, we're going to end the daf with a whole number of tekus. So what do we do when we don't know how to resolve the issue? And then that's another question. And then there's opinions about what we do when there's a teku, even then, so it's true, we say, okay, we don't know the answer. And again, teku means either the question will stand, or it means we'll wait till Eliyahu comes, but what do we do until then? And then there's rules about what we do when there's a teku, depending on the scenario. So anyway, that's all background for today's stuff. Sibor echad, we're starting now the very end of the 3rd line. Sibor echad shel chametz, there's a pile of chametz. Ulefanav shnei batim bidukim. And in front, we have, standing in front of you, there's a pile of, right, this sounds like a riddle. There's a pile of chametz, there's 2 houses, and what do? Ata achbar, in other words, right now the pile's outside the house, that's all fine. But comes a mouse. Vishakal, and the mouse takes the chametz. and disappears and runs into one of the houses. But what's the problem? We have no idea which house the mouse went into. We know the mouse went into a house, but we don't know which house. Sounds a bit like a Dr. Seuss book. V'lo yadana ilahai al ilahai al. So now we don't know, did the mouse go into house A or house B? So what did they say? Hainu shnei shvilim. Oh, we have a classic case that we always discuss, which is called two paths. It's the case of two paths where you have a path where there's a dead body buried underneath on the path, and you don't know which path it is. There's two paths. One has a dead body, one doesn't. If you walk past the dead body, tumat oel, right? Tumat mate, it rises up, right? When there's no tent, it just rises up. You pass through this path. So now the issue becomes, what if, ditznam, what's the situation? Shnei shvilin, echad tameh v'echad tahor. So one has a dead body underneath, one doesn't. Halach be'echad mehem. So one person goes on one path, ve'asa taharot. And then after this, the person started dealing with things that generally we keep b'tahara. So meaning, if the person became tameh lamet, they would mess up, right? They make the kelim impure. And his friend comes along and goes on the other path and then dealt with taharot again. So what we know for sure is one of them is tameh and the kelim that they dealt with are definitely impure. But we don't know which one. But it's definitely true that one of them is a problem, exactly like our case. It's definitely true that one of these houses needs to do badika again because the chametz is in there, but we just don't know which one. So here comes our debate. And then we're going to have actually an explanation of this debate, that this debate isn't actually across the board. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im nishalu ze b'fnei atzmo v'ze b'fnei atzmo. If each one, okay, before we get to this, I have to explain some background. Safek tuma, how do we deal with safek tuma? Normally we say if there's safek about something by Torah law, we're stringent. And tuma is by Torah law. However, it depends. When it comes to tuma, there's a rule. If it's safek in a public place, we're lenient. If it's a safek in a private place, like something that belongs to an individual, then we're strict. Why is that? It sounds a little bit random. It all is learned out from the sota. Okay, if you learned the first cycle of Daf Yomi, you'll know this comes up very often, that this sugya comes up many times, that the sota, okay, this is a woman who the husband suspects her of being with some other man, and then after he suspects her and kind of accuses her, then she goes, they warn her, you can't go into a room alone with this man. She goes into a room anyway alone with that man, and we don't know what happened in that room, so she's a sota. Now, the Torah uses the language there. It's not tuma, it's not impurity that we're talking about, but the Torah uses the language of if she is nitma'ah or not nitma'ah. Okay, meaning if she's impure, she's not impure, which means did she sleep with him or did she not? So now what the Torah says is, now when is this sota going to be problematic that we're going to then bring her to the temple and go through the whole ceremony of the sota woman? That's only if she went into a room alone with him. That means safek in a Reshut Yachid is going to be a problem. But if she was in public with the person, nobody has any suspicions about her at that point, that's okay. So from there, they learn to tuma in general, okay? That safek tuma in public is not a problem. So therefore, if each of these people who walked on the path goes to the rabbi and says, what's the situation? The rabbi will say to each one individually, you're fine, because each case is a safek tuma case, right? It comes out fascinating. This clearly isn't the objective truth because one of them is clearly tameh, and then their kelim that they dealt with are tameim, are impure. But since each one on their own comes to the rabbi, and each time he has to look just at this person. Did you go on the path? Did you not? We don't know, and it's all in public, so we're going to rule leniently. So therefore, comes Rabbi Yehuda, and he says, Im nishalu ze b'fnei atzmo v'ze b'fnei atzmo, they each came separately to holim. But if they both came at the same time, now he can't look them both in the face and say, right? He's looking now at the whole situation. He can't look at the whole situation and say no one is tameh. So therefore, tameim, they both become tameh misafek, out of doubt. Rabbi Yossi Omer, ben kach uben kach tameim. Rabbi Yossi says, no matter what, they're tameim, because we know one of them is tameh. So we have to be stringent in this case. It's not a classic case of safek tuma. Safek tuma is, I don't know, did I touch it? Did I not? Here we know for sure there was tuma, so we're clearly going to rule stringently. Amar Rava, but now there's a little bit of a distinction here, or a way of limiting the machloket between them. Amar Rava b'itema Rabbi Yochanan. And then after we finish this, we'll get back to our case and see how this relates. Bevat echat divrei hakol tmeim. Everyone agrees that if they came to the rabbi at the same time, this we already knew, it said this in the Bright already, in the Mishnah, then it's a Mishnah in Taharot, by the way. Everyone agrees that tmeim. Bezeh charzeh, if they came separately, divrei hakol torim. By the way, even Rabbi Yossi agrees, even though it didn't sound that way, he agrees that if they each came separately to the rabbi, then we can rule leniently. But so what's their machloket? Lo nechleku ela bebali she'el alav ve'al chavero. If I go, let's say I was one of the people, and I went and I asked on your behalf and on my behalf. I asked on behalf of both of us. So we're not both there, but I asked the question about both of us. I say, listen, me and my friend, we both went on this path. What do we do? Rabbi Yossi, it's a good example of, don't try to be nice to someone and ask a question for them because you're only getting yourself into trouble. So in that case, again, depending on who you hold by, Rabbi Yossi midame leila batachad. Rabbi Yossi says, since you're asking about both of them, even though both of them aren't in front of the rabbi right at the same time, it's as if it's bevatachat, it's all at the same time. The Rabbi Yehuda midame leila zeh. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, since only I came, the rabbi can look me straight in the face and say, listen, you don't have to worry about it. And since I'm asking on behalf of someone else, we can view that as two separate questions. Okay, so now go back to our case. So we have this chametz. We have an achbar. The achbar took the chametz into one of the houses. We don't know which one. So if both the owners of the house come forward together, then everyone's going to say you both have to do bedika. But if they come separately, then everyone's going to agree they don't have to check again because suffix, right? We're going to be lenient here. But if one asks on behalf of both, then we're going to have a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Next, suffix. Suffix al, suffix lo al. What if we don't know if the mouse actually went into the house or not? Okay, we have no idea. We saw the mouse take the bread, but we don't know. We have this house that's checked already. We don't know, did the mouse go in or not? Hainu bik'ah. This is like the case of a bik'ah, of a valley, and it seems like there's a field in this valley. Ubeplukted Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbanan. So here's the machloka between them. All of these are going to be the same structure till we get to the second section of today's daf. But all these cases are, here's the scenario, here's the machloket. And this machloket is the same machloket they would have by us. Ditna. And then they're always going to quote the source. Ditnan, as it says in the following Mishnah, it's also Mishnah in Taharot. Hanichnas lebik'ah b'yemot hakshamim. You go into this field or a valley in the middle of the winter. Now, why is the middle of the winter relevant? Normally, in the summer months, people walk through here all the time. That's going to turn it into a Reshut Rabim. If it's Reshut Rabim, remember, Safek Tuma, because we're talking about Tuma here. If we're not sure whether there's impurity or not, we're going to say we're lenient in a Reshut Rabim. But in the winter months, what happens? That's when you plant. Now, when you plant in a field, people, okay, assuming people are respectful, but generally people did not walk in the fields in the winter months because, okay, not just because it was muddy and disgusting, but because they would ruin the crops and they were respectful of everybody's crops. So therefore, if you go into this bik'ah in the Yemot HaGshamim, it's going to be viewed as a private domain. V'tuma b'sadeh plonit. And you know there's tuma in the following field, in this bik'ah. Okay, this big bik'ah, big valley, and there happens to be tuma, there happens to be a dead body buried in one of the fields. V'amar echad, and one person comes along and says, halachti b'makom alaz. I went to the following bik'ah, okay, I was in this area. Ve'ini yodea im nichnasti b'ota sadeh ve'im lo nichnasti. I don't actually know, did I go into that field or did I not? So, Rabbi Eliezer mitaher v'chachamim mitamim. Okay, so first of all, chachamim seems the most obvious. This is what we call safek tuma b'reshut yachid. You're in a private domain. It's safek. We don't know, are you tamei or not? So we say we're going to be stringent because that's the law. So why does Rabbi Eliezer mitaher? Shaya Rabbi Eliezer omer, safek bi'ah tahor, safek magat tum'ah tamei. He says the following. It's very interesting. It makes a lot of sense. He says, if you're not sure if you went to a place where there was tumah or not, that's not when we say safek tumah is we're stringent. If you went into a place where there was tumah and you just don't know, did you come in contact with it or not? Let's say you went into the field, but you went in a straight path and you didn't walk in the whole field and you don't know, did you walk where the tumah was or did you not? That's safek tumah that we're going to be stringent about. But if you don't even know if you went into the field, we're not going to be strict about that. I thought of a comparable halachic situation. Birkat HaGomel. We say Birkat HaGomel. It's a bracha of thanks when something bad happens and we're kind of saved from a difficult situation. You get into a car accident, right? Let's say you're driving in your car and there's an accident a second before you and you missed it by a second, right? You almost got into a car accident. Do you make a Birkat HaGomel on that? Right? Most people say no, because nothing actually happened to you, right? That's the same idea here is you didn't even necessarily go in. You don't, now it's a little different because here you might have gone in, but it's kind of, nothing really, it could be nothing even happened. It could be you weren't even there at all. So therefore, it's not the same comparison, but it was this idea that it's almost, the suffix is only when something actually happens and you just don't know what exactly happened, okay? Whereas, right, like you got into an accident and you came out okay, rather than you almost got into an accident, but you didn't. Okay, so that's kind of the distinction Rabbi Eliezer makes here, which is very interesting debate about how we view Safek Tumah, right? Because according to Chachamim, that is Safek Tumah. You don't know if you went into a tummy place at all, that would be Safek Tumah also. Next case. So again, going back to our situation. So according to, right, since we don't even know if the mouse went into the house or not, we don't make you do B'dika according to Rabbi Eliezer. According to the rabbis, no, this is an issue. Okay, next case. Al ubadak. You went in. Okay, the mouse went in with the bread. You know for sure. But what happens now? Badak velo eshkach. You go into your house, you check, and you can't find the chametz. So now what? Right, you're stuck. Pluvte de Rabbi Meir Rabbanan. So how do we view this? Ditnan. Haya Rabbi Meir Omer. Kol davar shebechezkat tum'ah. Again, we're still back in the world of tum and tara in our comparisons. Anything, and now we start to deal with musagim, terms of halacha in other areas, chazaka, okay? We talked yesterday about rov. Okay, rov is one way that we determine halacha. We go by majority. Another way we determine halacha is chazaka. Chazaka can be used in different ways. Chazaka can be used, and not the way it's used here. Chazaka can be used to say that we make assumptions about the way people behave, about what we can assume might happen. We make certain assumptions, and those have halachic significance because we can assume this is what's going to happen in this situation. Sometimes chazaka means it has a particular status. Okay, like for example, a woman who we don't know got divorced, but we know she was married, she's bechezkat esherish, right? The last thing we knew about her was that she got married. If you want to prove that you got divorced, you want to get remarried, you have to prove to us that you got divorced. Until we have evidence, we assume you're in your presumptive status of married. So likewise here, he says, anything that was chezkat tahara. Now in our case, what's that? The mouse went into the house and there's a chazaka that there's food there because we saw the mouse bring the food in. So the chazaka of your house right now is it's not checked because there's chametz there. So Rabbi Meir says, anything that's bechezkat tum'ah. So now what are we talking about here? The situation that they're arguing about is there's 3 piles of stones and there's tumah under one of them, but we don't know which one. It sounds a little like 3-card Monty, right? You don't know which one it's under. So you check. Now, what happens if you can't find the tumah? So you can't, let's say it's a piece of a dead body and you can't find it. You search all 3 piles, you take away all the stones, you can't find it anywhere. So Rabbi Meir says, since it was bechezkat tumah, we know there was tumah here. Until you find it, you're stuck. Everything is going to be tameh. Which means until you find the chametz in your house, we're going to assume your house is not checked because the chametz was in your house. He says, no, you check as far as you can, okay? You check until you get to the rock, meaning if there's, right, what happens? Your pile of rocks is like in the dirt. So you check until you get to rock underneath where it's hard and clearly nothing went through there. Or karka betula, you get to dirt, soil that was never moved, untouched. So you know that it couldn't be anywhere below there. You basically check as far as you can. So you search through your entire house, okay? Once you've searched everywhere and you don't find the chametz, you can assume that it's no longer there. Now, in both cases, why could it have disappeared? Because an animal came and ate it, took it away. So all that's a possibility. And therefore, Chachamim say, you check as far as you can. If you don't find anything, you're good to go. Okay, next case. Al ubadak ve'eshkach. So now the mouse goes in, you check, and you find chametz. But what's our problem? How do I know that the chametz I found is the chametz that the mouse left. Could be that I found some other chametz that I forgot about. And maybe the mouse brought in chametz and it's somewhere else. Could say in this case, kind of in the davar sof, right? But that's their question. Plugta de Revi v'Rashbag, Tanya. So the Breita says, okay, but the issue is it does have a yesh l'davar sof, because you can check what happens. I'm in the middle of checking. I want to find this chametz. I find bread. Do I say I can stop here? Or do I say, no, search your entire house. When you're done searching your entire house, it's like we just said a minute ago, wait until you get to the Sela or the Karka Betula, and then you're done. In other words, we make you check your entire house. That's the debate. Do we say, once you find it, you're finished? Or do you have to check your whole house? Because maybe that's not the bread that mouse left. So here we go into another machloket. Plukta to Rebbe v'Rashbag. Again about Tuma, and again Tuma made from a dead body. Tanya, we have a field and we don't know. We know there was a grave there. We just don't know where the bones are buried. Anyone who goes into here is impure. But anywhere in the field, because we don't know where it is. So Safek Tuma, we're assuming it's Reshut Yachid, it's in a field, it's private. So it's Tameh. But Nimtza Ba'kever, if somebody finds the body buried, so as long as you don't walk where that body is, there's no tumat oil here, it's only tumah that goes straight up. So if you walk next to it, you're not going to be tameh. You can go through. Shani Omer kever shavad hu kever shenimtza divrei Rebbe, because Rebbe says, since we know there was a grave, there was someone buried here, and we found a body buried, we can assume that was the body that had gotten lost. So likewise with our bread, once you find the bread, you can assume that was the bread that was lost. Rashbag Omer tibadek kol hasadeh kula. Rashbag says, no, you have to check that entire field, because again, same idea. Until you check that whole field, you don't know. Maybe you found another grave. Maybe we didn't even know that someone else was buried there. So if you know someone was buried, it could be, people could be buried anywhere here, and therefore you have to worry about it. So again, it would be the same debate by us. Now we're going to leave the realm of Tum and Tara. We're going to enter a different realm, which is about sanctified items and non-sanctified items. If you remember, we learned about Maaser Sheni. When you have to bring your Maaser to the temple, and instead of doing that, you normally, instead of bringing your produce, you would redeem it onto a coin. So your coins, let's say you redeem it on your coins, and then you put your coins in a box, okay? And that's your Maaser Sheni money. That's sanctified. So what it happens if, okay, here's our case with our chametz, and then we'll go to the Maaser Sheni case. Hiniach tesha umatzah eser. After you finish bedika, this was the same 10 pieces that we talked about yesterday. After you finish your bedika chametz, you have 9 rolls left for tomorrow. Okay. In the morning, you find 10. Again, I'm just giving an example. The morning, anytime before you burn your chametz, you find 10 pieces. Now you only left 9. So the big question is what? Is it that the 9 you left were the ones you left, and now 1 got added, and you're fine because your 9 that you left yesterday are still intact, and there's 1 extra. Okay, we don't have to worry, there's more. However, there's another possibility, which is since it's not the same way you left it, maybe the 9 that were there were taken by animals to different places of your house and are somewhere else, and 10 new ones got brought in here. That's going to be the question. Okay, I know it sounds a little far-fetched, I see from expressions, but this is what the Gemara suggests. And we're going to see it's a plukta de Rebbe v'Rabbanan when it comes to Maaser Sheni money. Titanya, hiniach maneh umatzah matayim. You left 100 shekels or 100 maneh, it's 100 coins, and you come back. Okay, so you left Maaser Sheni money in a box. There were 100. Then you come back and you find 200. Now, again, the question is, right? According to Rebbe, Rebbe says, okay, you had your 100 that were Maaser Sheni. Now you have another 100. We'll assume those are chulin, but right now they're mixed up with Maaser Sheni. Everything is safek sanctified money, right? Which again has to be treated with a level of sanctity, has to be brought to the temple to buy fruits and vegetables there and eaten there, okay? Or to Yerushalayim anyway, to Jerusalem. So he says, we assume the 100 that you left are still there, and someone added 100 to the box, and now those are messed up because they put them in the same box as the Maaser Sheni money. The Chachamim omrim, interesting that this is the rabbi's opinion because it seems a little more radical. Hakol chulin, we can assume it's all new money, and then it's not Maaser Sheni money, and it's all not sanctified. Okay, because he says look, what you left isn't what you found. Someone must have taken that money, and now there's new money here. We don't view 200 as 100 and another 100, right? We say this is something new. So likewise, let's take our example. If you say you find 10 when you really left 9, if you hold by Rebbe, we'll assume you don't have to do Badika again because your 9 that you left are still there. But if you hold by Chachamim, right, it's interesting. There, the rabbis are lenient. In our case, it would be a stringency because we'd say this must be new bread, which means that you got to go find those 9 pieces. Again, then what would you do? You'd search your whole house. If you find more, great. If you don't, okay, but you have to search your whole house till you find 9 pieces. What if the reverse case? Hiniach asara, you left 10 pieces. Umatza, or hiniach eser, umatza tesha. And you come back and there's only 9. Now at this point, it's right? It's the reverse case. 1 is now missing. So can you assume, again, it's the same idea though. If 1 is missing, do we assume they took all of them and now there's 9 new ones in place? Or do we assume they just took 1 and then what happens? So now what would be? Well, you still have to search for that 1 because 1 is missing. But once you find 1, you can stop your search. Or do we say, no, you have to look for 10 because we assume those 9 are not the same 9 that were left from the 10 because you don't have it exactly as it was before. So Hainu Seifa, this is actually this latter part of the Braita about Maser Sheni. Ditanya, Hiniach Matai, if you left 200 that were Maser Sheni money, Umatza Maneh, when you come back to that box, there's only 100. Or Maneh Munach, Umaneh Mutal, Divrei Rebbe. Again, Rebbe says, L'shitatam, right? They say, must be, you left 100, sorry, the 200 are made up of 100, and as 100 were taken, and there's still 100 left. That's your original Maser Sheni money. The Chachamim omrim hakol chulin, but the rabbis say no, everything is chulin. We view this as something new. And again, the rabbis are lenient when it comes to Maser Sheni, but they'll be strict when it comes to chametz. Next case, hiniach bezavit zo umatza bezavit acheret. This is a bit of a different scenario. You left chametz on your kitchen table, and you come back in the morning and you find it on your dining room table. That's weird, right? I didn't leave it there. So, plugta de Rashbag ve Rabbanan. They say this is a machloket Rashbag and Rabbanan when it comes to, we're back to Tuma, in case you were worried that we left it. So we're back to cases of impurity, de Tanya. Kardom she'avav babayit. You lost an axe in your house and you can't find it. Habayit tameh. We make this big jump and we say everything in your house is impure. Seems weird. Why? Shani Omer comes Tanakama and says, Adam tameh nichnas l'shamu nitalo. Okay, this is classic. You're missing something in your house. Okay, let's say you had workers in your house the other day, and now all of a sudden you're missing some jewelry, right? What do you immediately do? Oh, must be the workers came and took my jewelry, right? It can't be I misplaced it. It must be someone took it, right? So you can assume, according to Tanakama, we assume that the robbers took it. And now why does that make it impure? Robbers impure? What does that have to do with anything? So the Mepharshim explained that robbers were likely Amei ha'aretz. If you remember, Amei ha'aretz are people who aren't careful, but one of the things they're not careful about is laws of purity and impurity. So likely they were tamei, which means that when they came into your house, there's also an assumption that they touched other things. So therefore, if you come into your house and you see that something's missing, you can assume, now they say an axe, maybe because an axe is something likely that a bad person might want and steal. So therefore, you can assume that they took it, and therefore everything in your house becomes tameh because maybe they also touched everything and made it impure. Rashbag omer habayit tahor. What are you talking about? Shani omer, just because you're missing your axe, it's very likely hishilo la'acher v'shachach. Maybe you lent it to someone and you forgot that you lent it to them, right? This is classic. You say, oh, someone stole it, but maybe you just lent it to someone and forgot. Or you moved it from one corner to another. Okay, now the Gemara says, wait a minute, what are you talking about? You moved it from one corner to another. Weren't we talking about that your axe is lost? You don't see it at all. So the Gemara is going to ask, says, Zavit man dachar shmei. What? Where did all of a sudden you start talking about corners here? We weren't talking about that something moved from one place to another. Now, if you remember, we were, but that was in the chametz case. This Braita wasn't talking about things moving from one corner to another. So they say, oh no, there's really words missing in this Braita, and the way it should read is like this. Kardom she'ava babayit, habayit tameh. If you lose your axe in your house is considered tameh. Again, this is Tanakama. Shani omer, adam tameh nichnas l'sham u'nitalo. Oh, or maybe this is the scenario. Oh, shinicho b'zavit zo, matzah b'zavit acheret, habayit tameh. Shani omer, adam tameh nichnas l'sham u'nitalo mizavit zo v'nicho b'zavit acheret. Or, in other words, there's two scenarios. One is you're missing it. Two is it's not where you left it. Now, if it's not where you left it, according to Tanakama, we assume that somebody else came in here and moved it, because how else would it have moved? Obviously, if you think about it, Rashbag is a lot more logical. Rashbag is premised on the assumption that people are very forgetful. And therefore, Rashbag omer, habayit tahor, shani omer, hishilo la'acher v'shachach, right? If you can't find it, maybe you lent it to someone and you forgot. Or maybe you moved it and you just don't remember that you moved it. How many times has this happened to us? I'll tell you a story which really happened to me last year, and I just couldn't help but think about it here. So one morning I wake up, I come downstairs, and I think I actually told this case one time in the daf, but anyway, I come downstairs. My husband had left on a trip really early in the morning, 4 a.m, and he didn't put the alarm on. I come downstairs, the alarm's not on, and I start looking for my computer. And my computer's nowhere to be found. I need my computer to teach in the morning. I can't find it. So I'm looking all around, don't know where my computer is. And then all of a sudden I see it was the winter and the window was open a little bit in the dining room, and I realized that someone broke in. And, first of all, he had left. It was crazy morning. Okay, clearly they stole that. They stole a bunch of computers. Okay. Go to take my daughter to school, and I can't find her sneakers. And I'm thinking, could the robber have stolen her sneakers? I even remember, because my husband was going out of town, I wanted to have everything organized for the morning. I really remember putting her sneakers in the kitchen. And I'm thinking, I know I put her sneakers in the kitchen. Could the robbers have stolen? And I start thinking, maybe they stole her sneakers. And then I think, you must be going out of your mind. Robbers don't steal size 2 sneakers. That's just not something that robbers are interested in. So the bottom line is they actually did steal her sneakers. Her sneakers were not in the house, and I know they were there the night before, and they really stole her sneakers. It was crazy, but it's exactly this scenario, right? Are you going to start thinking, oh, they stole, everything, they touched everything in my house, and oh, whatever else is missing, they took also? Or is that ridiculous? And, the likely thing that happened that morning was, no, you obviously don't remember, and you put the sneakers somewhere else, but the sneakers haven't turned up and it's been a year. So I think it's pretty clear they did steal them. Anyway, interesting story. So let's move on. So now the whole question is, if you find your chametz somewhere else, again, do we assume it's the same chametz and just you don't remember that you moved it? Or, it's also likely there's other people in your house that maybe someone else moved it. Or do you assume that someone else came in, which means that what we have right now is that this scenario is this chametz is other chametz, and you have to go find your original chametz because it's not the same chametz. That's what you would have to do here. Okay, next scenario. Amar Rava. Okay, that's the end, by the way, of all these sfeikot of this category. Now we're going to have questions that Rava asks. Okay, and this I call almost like riddles and kind of funny questions. Amar Rava, achbar nechnas v'kikar b'fiv. So the achbar comes in with bread in its mouth. V'nichnas acharav u'matza perurim. Okay, we're not yet up to the funny cases. This is something a little bit different. You go into your house now and you find crumbs. Can you assume they came from the mouse? Tzarich b'dika. Why? I don't know why they assume this, but I don't know enough about mice. Mice don't make crumbs, apparently. Okay? So therefore, if you see crumbs, it must be from something else, in which case you better go find what the mouse had. Now, most of the Mepharshim say we're talking about that you found enough perurim to make up a whole loaf. In other words, if you just find a few crumbs, you're still in it. Even if you would assume it came from the mouse, you'd still have a problem because it's only part of it. You'd have to assume that if you had enough crumbs that would make up an entire loaf or whatever it was that the mouse came in with, an entire roll, let's say, then you would still have to do bedika because you can't assume these came from the mouse. However, you might relate to this. What if Amarava tinok nichnas v'kikar b'piv? If your kid walks in, a little kid, tinok doesn't always mean a baby, but a little kid walks in with bread in its hand, nichnas acharav u'matzah perurim, if you find crumbs, We all know, right? Anyone who has kids in the house, there's always crumbs on the floor, right? They're making mess all the time. And therefore, you can assume the crumbs came from the child. Bye, Rava. Here come our interesting questions. You see a mouse scamper into your house with bread. Then you see a mouse scamper out of your house with bread, forgetting about, that you might panic and say, what are mice doing in my house? But the question is the mouse that you saw the mouse that came in? And is it the same bread? Now, we don't really, because we don't live with mice all the time, and we don't see the difference between one mouse and another. So to us, all mice kind of look the same. So therefore, if you see one going in and one going out, mi amrinan hainu haida'al v'hainu haidanafag. It must be the same one that went in and the same one that went out, which means that the bread is out of my house now. Oh, Dilma achrinahu. Or maybe this is some other mouse that came in when I wasn't noticing. And there's another piece of bread and I got to go find that one that the other mouse brought in. And now each of these questions is going to build on the other. Even if we assume that we can make an assumption that this was the same mouse, it looks the same, we can assume it's the same. However, let's say a white mouse comes in with bread in it, right? We can't really tell the difference between different mice, but if they're different colors, we could definitely tell the difference. So if a white mouse comes in with bread, and a black mouse runs out with bread in its mouth, mahu, do we say, hi vaday achrinahu? This is clearly a different mouse and therefore clearly different bread. O dilma armuye armimine, or maybe he stole the bread from the other one, and it might not be the same mouse, but it could be the same bread. Ve'imtim tzalomar, and if you want to say, again, making assumptions about mice, achbarim lo shakli me'adade, it's not the nature of mice to go steal bread from one and from another. But what if achbar nichnas v'kikar b'piv v'chulda yotze v'kikar b'fia mahu? What if you have an achbar and then you have a chulda? Now a chulda generally, right, from the cat family, attacks mice. So now the chulda comes out with bread mahu. Do you assume that the chulda vaday me'achbar shekalte? Where did they get it from? They must have gotten it from the mouse. Must be the same bread. O dilma achrinahu, or maybe it's a different piece of bread. Dim ita. Now, why would you assume it's a different piece of bread? Because if it came de me'achbar shekalte, if it really came from the achbar b'fia hava mishtakach, we would have found the mouse in its mouth also, not just the bread. Ve'imtim tzalomer am ita de me'achbar shekalte. Let's assume he did take it from the mouse. Achbar b'fia hava mishtach. Oh, sorry, opposite. Im ita de me'achbar shekalte achbar b'fia hava mishtachach. If we assume that it's only going to be if the achbar is in its mouth, okay, but if the achbar is not in its mouth, we don't assume it took it from the mouse. Achbar nichnas v'kikar b'fi v'chulda yotzeit v'kikar ve'achbar b'fi chulda. What if he comes out with a piece of bread and the mouse in its mouth? Do we assume mahu? Again, there's two options. Why? Ha chavadai iuhu. Clearly, you took the bread from the mouse. O dilma im ita di iu niu kikar b'fi achbar mishtaka chavabai ishtekuche. O dilma. Okay, so now do we say if he had gotten it from the mouse, what would we have seen? We would have seen him with the mouse in its mouth and the bread in the mouth of the mouse. But that's not what we see here. We see bread and achbar in its mouth. Or O dilma mishum biatute hu nafal ushkalte. Or maybe the mouse was so scared of the chulda that he dropped it out of its mouth. Okay, I just read this story with my daughter yesterday about the raven and the fox, and how the fox wants the raven to gets the cheese from the mouth of the raven, and he makes the raven sing, and then the raven sings and it drops. I was thinking exactly about that, right? When he scares him, drops out of his mouth, and that's why he got both. So what's the obvious answer? Teku. We don't have an answer to any of these questions. Bye, Rava. Rava continues to ask. Kikar, different kinds of questions now. Kikar b'shmei korah. Sarich sulam lahorida o ein sarich. Let's say you have a loaf of bread all the way up in your rafters in your house. You have these beams at the top of your house. Now, do the rabbis make you go all the way up there and do bedika? Do we say, mi amrinan kulei hai lo etruchu Rabbanan? The rabbis didn't bother you to do this. Why? It's not going to fall from there on Pesach, and therefore it's not seen. It's not, right? It's not in line of vision, and it's not going to fall. O dilma zimnin dinafal va'ata lemichle. But you know what? Maybe there's a small chance it will fall. Maybe they make you check there. The intim tzalomer zimnin denafa ba'ate l'michle. And if you want to say maybe there is a chance it will fall, kikar bebor. What if you have it in a pit? Sarich sulam lahalota o ein sarich. Do we make you go all the way down using a ladder to the bottom of the pit to check? Do we say, in other words, nothing's going to fall from the pit into your house. It's the opposite direction, right? So maybe it'll fall from the rafters, but it's not going to fall from the pit. Oh, Dilma, or do we say, Zimnin, you're going to like this, Zimnin denachet l'me'abat sorche. Sometimes people go there to do their thing in the bathroom. They use the pit. So if you go down there and there happens to be bread in there, you might, right? You might come to eat it. I don't know why when you're going to the bathroom, you're going to think of eating food, but again, you might find chametz there and therefore we make you do it. Intim tzalomar. Okay, this is going to get more creative. If you want to say, I think Rava wins the prize for creativity in today's stuff. So if you say, maybe you'll go down and you might end up eating it when you go to the bathroom, kikar b'fina chash. What if there's bread in the mouth of a snake? Sarich chabar lahotzi. Do you need a snake tamer to get it out? Do you need to go hire someone to get the bread out of the snake? Oh, ein sarich, or maybe you don't need to. Do we say, the rabbis maybe make you climb up to the rafters, or they maybe make you climb into a pit, but they don't make you hire someone to spend money, right, on a snake charmer. O dilma lo shna, or maybe it doesn't make a difference and you have to anyway. So we end with teku. Okay, a little bit more to today's stuff. That's the end of all these suffix questions. What do we do? Again, when it comes to teku in Dine Mamonot, it's very interesting. We say suffix mamonot yachloku, we split 50-50. We'll get to all this in Bava Metzia. Or some people say that you do hamotzi mechaver alav haraya, right? In other words, depending on the scenario, we use other halachic principles, which is wherever the money is, the money stays. Whoever is trying to take the money out of the other, he doesn't, it stays exactly where it is, right? And if it's in nobody's hands, then we say yachloku, we split it 50-50. Usually when it comes to Isurim and there's a teku, so we're machmir and we say we have to be stringent. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Bodkim, this actually we saw quoted before, Bodkim or Yudalid, Uba Yudalid Shacharit, Uba Shad Habir. We use this as one of our proofs that or is night. You check both the night of the 14th and in the morning and when you burn the chametz, right? Obviously we don't do this. Hold off, we'll see in the Gemara. The Chachamim Omrim, Lo badak or yudalid, yivdok yudalid. If you forgot to do badika at night, you do it the next morning. Lo badak yudalid, you didn't do it first thing in the morning, yivdok betoch hamoed. Okay, toch hamoed, moed usually means holiday. Moed also means appointed time. So machloket Rashi Tosfot here what this means. Rashi says this means the time appointed for doing bi'or, meaning midday. You do it by midday. And that's the latest time. At least for right now. We'll get to it in a minute. Lo badak betoch hamoed, yivdok la'achar hamoed. And then according to Rashi, this means, well, if you didn't do it, you at least have the rest of the day, even though really you're already kenny chametz, but you can check the rest of the day. Tosfot says, no, it can't be that's what it means. Tosfot says it means that you check betoch hamoed is on Pesach. And Rashi says you can't check on Pesach because maybe you'll find chametz and you'll come to eat it. But Tosfot says, no, you check on Pesach. And he says, and then la'achar moed is after Pesach. Now, what are you doing checking for chametz after Pesach? That's because of chametz shavar alav Pesach. If you kept chametz and you didn't sell it, and you didn't, now the problem is if you nullify it, it should be okay. But if you kept it after Pesach, it's forbidden to benefit from it. And therefore, you'd even have to check after Pesach. So there's different ways to understand this opinion. Whatever you leave over after b'dika chametz, you still have some chametz for tomorrow. You have to hide it. We talked about this yesterday. There were a bunch of different explanations why, so that you avoid doing b'dika after. My time into Rabbi Yehuda. So now we ask, why does Rabbi Yehuda need 3 b'dikot? So Rav Chisda v'Rav Bar Chana da'Amarei Tavayu, they both say keneged shalosh hashbatot sheb'Torah. Says 3 times in the Torah that you have to get rid of your chametz. Now, it doesn't exactly say you have to get rid of it, but it does say you shouldn't have chametz around. And we'll see. Lo yorecha chametz v'lo yorecha seor. That's one. You can't see chametz or leaven. Shivat yamim seor lo yimatzeh bebatechem. Right, that was bal yireh and bal yimatzeh. You can't find it in your houses for 7 days. And ach bayom harishon tashbitu sor bebatechem. On the first day, you should get rid of chametz. Mativ Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, wait a minute. He says, it says in the following source, I don't understand Rabbi Yehuda needs 3 b'dikot. Look at the following Tanaitic source. It says here, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol shelo badak b'shlosha prakim alalu shuvei no bodek. which sounds like, now it's not so clear yet, but it sounds like he's saying these are all just options. If you didn't do the first, you do the second. You didn't do the second, you do the third. And after that, shuvei no bodek. And the difference between him and Tanakama is, Tanakama says you could even bodek la'achar moed. And they think only before, right? Before biur. Rabbi Yehuda. So Alma b'mikam ve'elach hu deplike. The machloket isn't how many bedikot you need to do. Of course, Rabbi Yehuda thinks only one bedika. It's just a matter of what's your end, what's the last possible time you can do it. Marzutra matnehachi, he had that version. He had a different version, sorry. The Mativ Rav Yosef, the Rav Yosef brought a bright and this one proves it even more. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, kol shelo badak be'echad mishlosha prakim alalu. In one of these three, shuvei no bodek, doesn't check anymore. Alma b'shuvei no bodek hu depligi. Clearly the machloket is, right, what's the end time, but not that you do three bedikas, which would then reject that whole thing about three hashpatot. Ella, Rabbi Yehuda Nami im lo badak amal. He really was saying, if you didn't check at night, then you check in the morning. If not in the morning, then late in the morning, but that's it. And Chachamim say you can go farther. So what's the root of their machloket? Mar savar makami isur im batar isur lo. Once Rabbi Yehuda says only before it's forbidden. Once it's forbidden, what's the problem? This goes back to what we said earlier. We don't want you checking. If you check when it's forbidden to eat chametz, you might find it and you might accidentally come to eat it. Rabbanan savri lo gazri. And the rabbi said, come on. You're checking for chametz to get rid of it. Of course, you're not going to accidentally. So interesting. They're all worked up about you might see chametz and, eat it. But one of the reasons, a bunch of reasons why they're very stringent with chametz, one is because chametz is forbidden by karet. Another is that because you're so used to eating chametz that you might accidentally eat it because it's something you eat all year round. It's not like treif, treif food like pig. You're not going to accidentally eat. But chametz you're so used to eating all year round, so it's more likely you might actually accidentally eat it. Okay, we'll stop here today. We'll pick up tomorrow with, is he really worried that you're going to eat this chametz while you're checking? Okay, and they're going to raise a question on that. Okay, that's it for today. Have a great day.